Good morning. Welcome to our policy primer on border security, our second in a series of two. I hope that you were here last week when we discussed the problems that we have on the Texas border. This week we're hoping to find out what the solutions are to the problems on the border. So I will introduce our moderator, my friend, Commissioner Todd Staples. You're still a friend, aren't you, Todd? Todd Staples has been serving the public in the roles as City Council member, State Representative, State Senator, and Agriculture Commissioner since 1989. He has focused on trade and business during his career with an emphasis on taxpayer interest. Commissioner Staples received his degree from Texas A&M, and he and his wife Janet have 4 grown children. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce Todd Staples.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a delight to be with you today. Thank you for taking your time to be here to focus on one of the biggest issues facing our nation today. We know that many of you bring a great deal of insight to this issue on securing the border, a symposium on solutions. And so we will have a question and answer time for our distinguished panelists upon the conclusion of their remarks. I know there's a lot of people here today who work every day to make Texas a better state. I want to recognize 3 individuals that are here today. We have Andy Lauterbach, the Sheriff of Jackson County, who is the current chair of the Texas Sheriff's Association. We've got Sheriff Greg Hamilton with Travis County here, and we have Sheriff T. Michael O'Connor with Victoria County. Let's give those gentlemen a round of applause. We appreciate the service of you and your deputies every day to make Texas a safer place. Last week, the Texas Public Policy Foundation brought together nationally recognized experts to answer the question, what is happening on the Texas border? And they said and provided the most current level of activity and confirmed without contradiction the dangerous dynamic of our southern border. This week, TPPF once again assembled an all-star team of experts for today's forum titled Securing the Border, a Symposium on Solutions. Now, we know that news of the tragic and torturous deaths of 2 American journalists, James Foley and Stephen Sotloff, have drawn the world's spotlight on the brutality of ISIS, as well as a strong response from the United States government. We have to ask, why have we not, as a nation and a federal government, devised an even more strategic and permanent solution to stop the damage to our country from the deadly drug war that's occurring in Mexico? I characterize the drug war in Mexico as a civil war, and I do so because the Mexican military is fully engaged in that country, fighting the cartels because of the level of corruption that's occurred in the states and because of the deadly long arm that the cartels exhibit. This civil war is without a doubt a war over trade routes into markets, into places like Houston and Los Angeles and Charlotte, and many others, not to mention Chicago, which has their own set of problems associated with what's going on in Mexico. The viciousness of the cartel violence, the headless bodies hung in public venues in Mexico, the activation of Mexican military to intervene, the spillover violence into the United States, the kidnapping of victims in the U.S., and transportation back into Mexico, among a host of barbaric crimes, as well documented, and literally no region of the U.S. is unaffected. In Texas, though, we don't just talk about problems, we focus on solutions. And that's why we're here today. You'll hear about 10 minutes from each of our panelists, unless some of them have a Dr. Mike Vickers moment. Dr. Vickers was one of our panelists last week. He's a great friend and a real patriot when it comes to addressing the challenges that we're facing. And it's my honor today to introduce our distinguished panelists that we have with us. First, I'd like to introduce Mike Gonzalez, a senior fellow with the Davis Institute for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. Mike spent close to 20 years as a journalist, 15 of them reporting from Europe, Asia, and Latin America. He left journalism to join the administration of President George W. Bush, where he was speechwriter for the Securities and Exchange Commission chairman before moving on to the State Department's European Bureau. Gonzalez joined Heritage as Vice President of Communications in March of 2009. In this new capacity, he has written on Hong Kong, China, and Latin America. Gonzalez was born in Cuba and left at the age of 12. Smart move, Mike. He also has lived in Belgium, France, Spain, Hong Kong, and South Korea while evading creditors. No, I just threw that in there. I couldn't help but think that when I read it, but I know that's not true. I know you were there with your passion and living and reporting from places like Afghanistan, Pakistan, China, Panama, and Cyprus, among others. Gonzalez holds an MBA from the Columbia Business School. He is an author of a book titled A Race for the Future: How Conservatives Can Break the Liberal Monopoly on Hispanic America. And it's available now, so I'd like to put in that plug. Let's welcome Mike to the panel here today. Next, I'd like to introduce Shika Damia, who is Senior Policy Analyst at the Reason Foundation. Damia is a Bloomberg View contributor, a columnist at the Washington Examiner, and writes regularly for Reason magazine. She is also a frequent contributor to the op-ed pages of the Wall Street Journal and numerous other publications. She previously served as a columnist for Forbes. Damia frequently appears on Fox Business Network and other television and radio outlets. Damia, who taught news writing courses at Michigan State University, earned a master's degree in mass communications from LSU, who will play the Texas Aggies on Thanksgiving Day this year. So if you have extra tickets, call me and we can work something out, I know. Let's welcome Damia to our panel today. And if I'm not mistaken, Mike and Shika, this is your first visit to Texas.
No,
Austin, to Austin. Well,
I couldn't have lived in Louisiana and not visited Texas.
okay, very good. That's right. That's true. Now I'm glad to introduce to you Laura Collins, Director of Immigration Policy at the American Action Forum. A former practicing attorney, Collins joined the forum after serving as a senior research analyst at the Republican National Committee, focusing on immigration and judiciary issues. She also worked on cooperative federalism and energy and environmental issues as a policy analyst for the Texas Public Policy Foundation. So we're glad to have you back here today. Laura holds a JD from the University of Texas School of Law and is licensed in Texas and Oklahoma. Let's welcome Laura back to Austin. And Laura, we will let you kick us off, if you will, with your comments at this time. Yeah, if you'll do that. Thank you.
Well, I'm so glad to be back in Austin. If you'd like to use the podium. Oh, sure.
If you'd like to use the podium to start our comments.
Then there
How
will
about
be.
that? Forgot that part.
Well, thank you guys so much for having me. I'm so excited to be back in Texas. Spent some time in DC the past few years and desperately miss Austin and desperately miss Texas and the warmth that's here. Most of my work focuses on the economics of immigration policy. And so for me, border security sort of is just one component that can work with the economics. So the primary focus of my work is how can we make an immigration policy, a legal immigration system that can help us alleviate some of the border security issues we have. I'm a firm believer that if you have a workable legal immigration system with an efficient guest worker program, that you eliminate some of the pressure on the border and allow our border security forces to focus their energy and their time and their resources on catching the people we really don't want in here, the cartels, the human traffickers, and the other criminals. And so I really do believe that we can approach this from an economic perspective. We can find a way to make market-based solutions. We can have guest worker visas, and we can expand legal immigration, legal permanent immigration in a way that helps our economy. We know that increasing immigration can raise the pace of economic growth by a full percentage point. We know that it can raise GDP per capita, and we know that it can reduce the federal deficit. So what's the flip side of that? If we just did complete enforcement, if you were to just enforce the law as strongly as possible and deport all of the undocumented immigrants in the country, many of whom are working here in the United States, you would have the reverse. You would have a contracting economy. You would have reduced residential construction spending, reduced growth. Those are not things that we want here. Texas in particular really benefits from having a strong economy. That's something we want for the rest of the United States as well. And those are important things to keep in mind when you talk about immigration enforcement and border security. I think an employment verification system is very important. I know that that's a little bit of a sensitive issue in some areas of the conservative movement, but if you're going to limit immigration in any way, you're going to have a workable employment verification system. I know that there are concerns that there are things in the employment verification system that don't work very well. There are false positives. It's unwieldy. We need to find a way to make that work. We need to make that work for our businesses so they have confidence in who they're hiring and that we can make sure that we are having legal workers and not perpetuating this problem. We know immigrants come here to work. We know that they come to states with job opportunities and low entitlement spending per capita, and so we need to find a way to give them that opportunity to work and not just turn away a bunch of people at the border for no reason. If we find this good medium between expanded immigration and enforcement, we should be able to alleviate the pressure that we've seen. People are, particularly when you talk about the border crisis, I think that what we see is a confluence of factors. There's rampant violence and poverty in Central America and other places these people are coming from, and there are still job opportunities here despite the unemployment rate. So you can't just isolate one factor and say that, we have rampant unemployment, we can't allow these immigrants in. We have to find a way to work to give more opportunities. And I guess the last point I'll make is, you'll have to forgive me, I was up since 4 a.m. Eastern time this morning and just landed a half hour ago. We do have historical basis for if we have expanded legal immigration that it does alleviate some of the problems on the border. The Bracero program, some of you will probably be familiar with, is something that we know when we ended the program, we had a spike in unlawful immigration because there were no more opportunities for legal workers and there was still a demand for immigrant labor. This is something that, while the program itself had some flaws, we can learn from the overall concept and make that work for us. And so I think that border security is something that needs to work in tandem with the economic issue of immigration reform and with a broad overhaul of our legal immigration system in order to have a workable immigration system that's good for all of us.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate that very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Staples. Thank you, Texas Public Policy Foundation, for having us over here for this very important topic. I just have to start by saying that Laura and I are in complete agreement here. And so actually I could just go back and sit down and say nothing more, but I do have 10 minutes, so I'm going to try and fill those up. So just to pick up from where Laura left, we all know that our immigration system is completely broken. And the immigration reform is completely dead in the water for the foreseeable future and even perhaps the unforeseeable future. And I think there is just one fundamental reason for that, and that is that basically no one trusts Washington. And there is very good reason for this. Ever since Washington moved away from what was essentially an open borders policy in the early 20th century and started engaging in what I consider to be this Leninist-style central planning of immigration flows, it has made a complete hash of things. And to see how big a hash, consider the gap in the demand. Oh, could you pass me that little remote over there? Yeah, consider the gap in the demand for foreign workers in various sectors of the economy and the supply that Washington bureaucrats allow. Now, these bureaucrats have divided foreign workers into two broad and crude categories for their purposes. They are skilled and unskilled workers. Every kind of work classification has to be shoehorned into them. So masons and welders, which are usually regarded as skilled crafts, are regarded as unskilled workers by these bureaucrats. And masseurs, who arguably, don't require as much skill as sometimes welders can, are regarded as skilled. Not only is this skilled and unskilled distinction completely snobbish and arbitrary, it is also actually, if you think about it, fairly economically meaningless. Because as far as employers are concerned, the only relevant distinction is between those workers who help them make a profit and those who don't. But Washington's bureaucrats impose their own hierarchies that privileged high-skilled workers over unskilled ones, and then give pretty shabby treatment to the skilled variety and the bureaucratic equivalent of waterboarding for the unskilled ones. Every year, the federal government hands out 85,000 H-1B visas that foreign techies or STEM graduates need to legally work in the country. But last year, in the first year that this visa became available, employers filed 125,000 petitions, at which point the feds simply stopped accepting applications, representing a gap of about 40,000 conservatively speaking, because a lot of employers have actually stopped even bothering to try playing this visa lottery. As for low-skilled workers, and you can see that in the chart over there, as for low-skilled workers, in theory, there are two visa programs that they can use legally to work in the United States. Agricultural workers need H-2 visas. Officially, there is no cap on them, but the requirements to obtain them are so impossible that they are virtually useless. There is an annual gap of about 412,000 between what's legally available and what employers needs, and that's there too. Non-agricultural workers need H-2B visas. The annual cap on these visas is about 66,000, and employers filed 300,000 petitions in 2008, which was a down year. This represents, conservatively speaking, a gap of 244,000. In effect, Washington's handling of immigration is designed to breed shortages and lawlessness, and that's why you're getting both of those things. But none of the reform proposals currently on the table in Congress would deal with these fundamental problems. The Senate bill that is going nowhere fast would raise some visa caps, but would create so much more red tape in other ways that it hasn't generated much enthusiasm from the industries and the employers whom it's supposed to benefit. On the other hand, it hasn't changed the incentives for lawlessness enough to mute the opposition of border states like Texas and Arizona, and that's understandable to some extent. One way to change all this would be by federalizing America's immigration system along the lines of Canada's provincial nominee program. I'll describe this program in some detail and describe also the advantages that this program would have for the United States, but let me just back up and explain to you how Canada's system has used to work. Before Canada embraced what is called the PNP program, it admitted immigrants based on a federal point system, which was developed just like our system in Ottawa, in a central, in the main city. Immigrants would be rated based on their education, skills, age, linguistic abilities, and those who got the required number of points would be admitted and others would be rejected. Now, this seems to make complete sense. This system was always more open and less daft than ours, but the problem it shared with ours was that it bred a mismatch between labor needs of local economies and foreign workers who were admitted. It was not uncommon to find Russian cab drivers in Toronto with PhDs in physics. But under Canada's PNP program, the 13 provincial entities, their equivalent of their states, get a quota to sponsor a total of 75,000 permanent residencies or green cards, not visas, but actual residencies. And the federal government in Ottawa offers about 55,000. With some restrictions, each province can fill its quota with whoever it wants for almost any reason it wants, in effect write its own immigration policy. Provinces may pick applicants that are left over from the federal point program. They can also solicit their own applications from anywhere in the world. In a direct attempt to poach the talent from US, some provinces are sponsoring H-1Bs who are stuck in the Americans' immigration labyrinth to come over to Canada. Direct loss of talent for us. Ottawa's role, the central government's role, is limited to conducting a security, criminal, and health check on foreigners picked up by the provinces, which has cut processing times for permanent residency to 1 year compared to a decade that it often takes in the United States. The program gives British Columbia the same flexibility to sponsor, say, bricklayers as it gives Ontario to sponsor computer programmers. The program has been such a huge success that provinces are now demanding that Ottawa raise its provincial quotas or scrap them altogether. Retention rates have been on average about 78% for these immigrants because there is such a close matching between the needs of the economy and the skills of the immigrants. Now, the economic advantage of the PNP program is obvious, that you get the immigrants that you need, but I'm going to list 5 non-economic advantages of this program. Very quickly, I'm going to run through them, and I'm going to go a little bit over my time. The first is that it would actually help America solve its illegal immigration problem through mutual cooperation between states. One reason that immigration reform has stalled in Congress is the vehement disagreement about what to do about the undocumented population. Everyone knows that Arizona's vociferous opposition to illegals and its very harsh tactics to get rid of them. But what is less well known is that its neighbor, Utah, has been asking the federal government for a waiver so that it can bring these undocumented workers to its borders because it actually needs them. If the Obama administration would give it a waiver, basically, Utah could offer legal residency to guest workers if they submit to a background check, pay a fine, and demonstrate a proficiency in English. But the Obama administration, even as it condemns Arizona, hasn't yet granted Utah's request for no discernible reason. In a federalized approach where each state had more say in setting its own immigration policy, the illegal problem would solve itself through mutual cooperation between states. Utah's residents could sponsor Arizona's illegals, taking them off Arizona's hands, allowing both states to get their preferred outcome. 2, it will change the incentives so that states won't treat immigrants as assets, but won't treat immigrants as liabilities that they shun, but actually assets that they want. One of the most striking aspects about the immigration debate in Canada and America is their strikingly different tones towards foreigners. In America, which is supposed to be the land of immigrants, ironically enough, foreigners are regarded as the enemy who are treated with suspicion, not as friends who should be welcomed with open arms. The entire conversation is dominated by those who advocate crackdowns, e-verify, barbed wire fences on the southern border, self-deportation, et cetera, et cetera. In Canada, on the other hand, the focus is on how do we recruit the people we want. While America is going around building fences, employers in Canadian provinces are dispatching recruiters all over the world, selling their provinces to prospective residents, kind of like companies do on college campuses. The beauty of the PNP program is that it hasn't made provinces foreign-friendly by singing John Lennon's Imagine to them. It has done so by giving them more control over their immigration policies, and therefore it has changed the incentives. Provinces can certainly turn away immigrants that they don't want, but it comes with an economic price because businesses are likely to locate to those provinces that have abundant labor that they want. This will mean if they reject immigrants, this will mean loss of jobs, tax revenues, population, what have you. And provinces can control the amount of immigration they want to avoid the strain on their public services, which is one of the big reasons there is so much opposition to illegal immigrants in border states here in America. So instead of fighting with each other, they actually, in Canada, they compete with each other to get immigrants. And it directs immigrant flows where they are best needed, where they are most needed. not where they simply land up. They land in Texas and Arizona, and then that's where they stay. The way Canada makes it work, they go where they are in that particular province where they actually have a job. The third advantage of this program would be that each state can answer the question of why do we want immigrants? And if they don't want them, they don't need to have them. In America, various factions are always warring over what exactly is the point of immigration. Do we want family reunification? Do we want economic, are there economic reasons? Each state can sort of answer that question for themselves. The fourth advantage this would have is that it'll turn states into what are called laboratories of democracy by our founders. If you've been covering immigration as long as I have, you know that another study on the wonders of immigration and what have you is not going to settle the debate. Everybody has studies on their side. In a federalized system, each state can field test its own hunch. In very comparable states like Utah and Arizona, if they opt for widely different approaches, we'll get something resembling a controlled lab experiment in the real world whose results will be instructive for everyone. I would imagine that over time, immigration policies of various states would converge as states voluntarily emulate the lessons of their more successful peers. It might take many decades for this to play out, but the end result will be achieved with less acrimony than if the federal government were to try and impose one solution top-down, and even if it's the same solution. And the last advantage of this kind of a federalized approach would be the program is far more in tune with the spirit of true federalism that is actually the basis of the United States. Provinces and states have a natural interest in their economies and the federal government in national security. Canada divides the federal and provincial roles in accordance with each primary interests, ensuring a balance between both. Canada's PNP program, therefore, actually lives up to some of the ideals of the United States, both as a land of immigrants and a federalized, decentralized country. I know a lot of you will have a lot of questions, which I hope to take during the question and answer session. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the Texas Public Policy Foundation for inviting me to speak here, Commissioner Staples. You for turning out. I'm very happy to be here. I've been visiting Texas for 30 years. Thank you. I live in Maryland, and every time I come back and talk to my 3 little kids about places I visit, like Texas, and my little daughter said one time, it's like, I wonder what it's like to live in a state where people are really proud to be from there. And I thought that was, don't send her bad emails. I thought that was pretty insightful. It speaks wonders about the strength of your culture here. And one last point, I want to thank you for mentioning the journalists, Sodloff and Foley. I want to ask all of you to keep them in your prayers and their families. That failure in the Middle East and the failure that we're seeing in Ukraine is tied to our failure here at the border. It's a foreign policy failure across the board by the Obama administration. That's a talk for another day. I'm here to talk about how our immigration policy has broken. And I know Diana's going to keep me on my toes, so I'm going to try to go at full Cuban American speed here. Let me start by reading a description of ill treatment that was meted out to a group of immigrants, and I want to ask you a question. And I'll read: the immigrants watched helplessly as the angry crowd spit out epithets at them, little children clinging to their mother's skirts for safety. It had been a long journey, and at the other end, it meant nothing but rejection and hatred. Now, did that happen on the Texas border, or was that a dusty Southern California town facing buses coming in? No, it's a trick question. It happened in 1729 in Boston, as ships from Londonderry and Belfast were bringing in immigrants, met with an angry crowd that did not want these ships to land. Now, these immigrants were Scots-Irish. So, in other words, of the same pinkish hue as the protesters in the crowd. They were Protestants, just like the protesters in the crowd. They were Presbyterians, that is, cut from the same Calvinist cloth as the Congregationalists in Massachusetts. And still, they were called these confounded Irish and not welcome in Boston. And other immigrants have met similar or worse fates. The Catholic, the native Irish, were not allowed to settle here until the 19th century. because of laws that were passed in the different colonies. The Germans, Ben Franklin famously said, worried that they're so numerous that they will shortly Germanize us instead of us Anglifying them. They all ended up succeeding through determination and grit and perseverance. This being Texas, I'm sure that many of you are Scots-Irish, and those of you that know the history of your histories, your traditions, you know what it was like to eke out a living on the Appalachian Trail all by yourself. Everybody contributed to this country, and that's not because this country is a racist or bigoted country. Being a nation of immigrants, it's hard work. I can tell you from every country that I have lived in, it's hard work, and we do it better than anyone. We used to do it better than anyone else. Let me quote Linda Chavez. I think she put it very well when she wrote, "The history of American ethnic groups is one of overcoming disadvantage, of competing with those who were already here and proving themselves as competent as any who came here before." Now, through our whole divisive immigration debate, liberals keep pounding the table and saying we're a country of immigrants, as if we conservatives somehow had missed this important part of our tradition. I think it is liberals that do not understand what being a country of immigrant implies. Well, I'm going to tell you the story now. When I was invited to come and speak here, the invitation said, "The outlines of our immigration framework were largely crafted in the mid-1960s by a coalition of labor unions and left-wing interests, and the outcomes reflect the imperatives of those interests." I think that hits the nail on the head. Since then, our immigration system has been broken. Let me tell you, I care deeply about two things: the continuation of this country being an experiment in freedom, in prosperity, in the rule of law. This is why my family fought so hard to come here in the early 70s. So I don't want us to fundamentally change, as candidate Barack Obama said. I want this country to continue to be this historical experiment. And I also want us to continue to be a nation of immigrants, because that has made this country better. And it has been an escape hatchet for people like me who faced tyranny. This is very important. I think both these traditions are at risk because of things that happened 50 years ago. And here's the thing. In the 1970s, the Washington bureaucracy decides to do away with 300 years of collective history and practice and to change everything. All of a sudden, they create 4 minority groups. One being African American, who was already an existing minority group. We all know the horrible history of how their ancestors were brought here. The second one, Native Americans. Can you pass me the drawer? You saw with Marco Rubio. This is a Cuban American thing. Thank you. But the other two were comprised mainly of immigrants. Hispanics, which were crafted. It's a very old word, but never used in that context. Many different groups. Cubans are very different from Guatemalans, who are very different from Dominicans, who are very different from Puerto Ricans. The bureaucracy reacts, as somebody mentioned, the end of the Bracero program. That is completely true. We saw a huge spike in illegal immigration. At the same time, we changed the Nationality Act, and a lot of legal immigrants began to come in, 25 million from Latin America since '65, including me and my family. The bureaucracy reacts to this by creating these groups in the aftermath of the civil rights movement. And the fourth group is Asians, also completely, the Japanese and the Cambodians are very different success rates, Filipinos, Chinese. Why did they do this? The laws at the time were very clear about why, and the people who wrote the laws were very clear. I'm going to quote one law, Public Law 94-311 in 1976. The changes were made in order to implement an affirmative action program. And everybody has been very clear about this at the time. Now, was this needed? No, it was not needed. This country had excelled at immigration since then. Nathan Glazer, now I quoted Linda Chavez before, she's a conservative. Nathan Glazer is not a conservative. Here's what he wrote in a very good essay in 1988. We had seen many groups become part of the United States through immigration, and we had seen each in turn overcoming some degree of discrimination to become integrated into American society. This process did not seem to need the active involvement of government, determining the proper degree of participation of each group in employment and education. It was not needed, and yet it was done. The creation of affirmative action did several things, and all the things, by the way, it's government contracts and obviously the collection of data through the census. If you read the census of 2010, it again says that it does this to help affirmative action and to help multicultural programs. This change did several things. First, it did not earn these people who are being helped the respect of their peers, nor self-satisfaction. We know through extensive research at the American Enterprise Institute, no, that's 5 minutes, all right. Satisfaction comes through earned work, through earned rewards. So it doesn't do that. It also tells people as they come in that this country is so bigoted that it needs the government to intervene and decide how it's going to, the participation is going to be apportioned, which is an awful thing. But here's the third thing that it does, which I think is very bad, is that it makes success contingent upon government intervention. And that, I think, is the key, because it begins to condition people to accept government intervention. And that's just the beginning, and that corrupts everybody. I am very proud of my last name. I'm very proud of my father, my grandfather, my ancestors, and I'm very proud of my children. My children study really hard, because if they don't, their mother and I will kick their butts. Not literally, they'll call the police, figuratively. They are going to get into a good school because if they don't, because they deserve it. And I want that. I don't want my name to be soiled by this. But here is the thing, and here's where it ties to the border and the amnesty that President Obama is threatening through affirmative action, through executive action. Progressives want to see immigrants. They want to condition them to think of government intervention as a benevolent government, because again, to quote candidate Barack Obama, he wants to fundamentally transform this country into something more akin to Scandinavia, to Europe, and I've lived in all these countries, and they're wonderful countries. I just don't want my country, the country that took me in, to become like France, where the government has a very large role, and you pay a price for that, and the currency of that price is liberty and freedom. So the progressives see Hispanics, frankly, as tools of change, as agents of change. And that ties to the fear, if that were not the case, then what Ms. Dalmia said would be true. The question at the border would be, we're like, well, how many can we take in so they can contribute? Instead, we have these divisive debates, but we never talk about the underlying issue. I tell you how I think conservatives should react to this, and that is not to recoil in horror at the demographic change. If the progressives want to make Hispanics agents of change, we need to work really hard at making them agents of conservation of American values. This is a challenge. There will be many of you who are conservative in the crowd. And those of you who are not, who are progressives, I say to you, with the best of intentions, you did things that put people in a hole. But we need to reach out to conservatives with a message, to Hispanics with a message of opportunity, with the American dream. You know, we need to allow we need to soar and talk about Norman Rockwell. This is available today. And we need to speak about dependence, not as something, dependency is part of the human condition. The question is, do I depend on my wife the way I do for everything, and she depends on me, and my children depend on us, and the community depend on my wife volunteering? Or do we depend on a remote, faceless bureaucrat in Washington deciding how to apportion my participation in society? We need to speak to people in those terms, and we need to reverse the problems that we have had for the last 50 years in order to continue to be, 1 minute, oh, I made it, in order to continue to be a nation of immigrants, which I think it's a great thing that this country is. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you all for your comments. I know you'll receive some very insightful questions, and before I open that up, to the audience, and we'll take a couple here and a couple in the middle and a couple in the back, and then work this side so we get the whole room worked in. Ms. Dalmy, you said something I think that most everyone here agrees with, and that is no one trusts Washington anymore. And I say that because each of you have outlined policies or proposals to consider in regard to solutions. The reason that conservatives are resistant to many of these solutions that are being proposed today is because they've been lied to. They've been misled. They've been given lip service. And it didn't just start today. I mean, the grand bargain of a hero of many of us, Ronald Reagan, in 1986, was not carried out and not implemented in regard to enforcement of the laws that we had that led to the swelling of the undocumented population here today. So in looking at the solutions and in recognizing a failed guest worker program that the liberals have written and established into law today, do any of your entities have a model that would address if the guest worker programs were revised? How do you ensure that we're not told the border is going to be secure today, you get the votes to pass what you need, and then a year later, 2 years later, we're right back in the same shape that we're in? I think that's a huge issue, a big stumbling block, one of the big stumbling blocks that we see today. So if any of you have models that would address that, or the models that you have focused more on just the mechanics of the guest worker program?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. You know, Reagan made a big mistake, and he kind of fell for the. Let me back up a second. As Mike pointed out, our immigration laws today are actually the result of a labor and liberal coalition. And the basic deal with this labor and liberal coalition was that they didn't want wage competition from overseas workers in the United States. So they created all kinds of problems to prevent workers from coming here. And the problems were, and the barriers that they have created were so huge that essentially when you have some kind of prohibition, they created a black market in labor, essentially. I mean, we see that in the drug war. We saw that in the actual prohibition of alcohol. We've seen that time and again, that when the government stops willing people from doing something legitimately, they will find an illegitimate way to do it. So that ultimately is the source of the problem. And Reagan, for all his brilliance, didn't actually change the debate about immigration. He fell for this liberal line. He continued to see immigration as something that has to be stopped rather than managed. So he actually didn't put an effective guest worker program in place. He just gave amnesty. If he had actually, along with the legalization, put an effective guest worker program in place, you wouldn't be seeing the kind of increase in undocumented population that you see right now. So in my view, a guest worker program is the best border security program. You cannot have border security without a decent guest worker program that gives people, employers over here who want to hire from abroad, and workers over there abroad who want to work with employers, legal options. Once you do that, you save, right now, I mean, I could go on and on about this, but right now, so much of our immigration resources are actually spent in assessing labor certification, which was something that labor put into law, which is before any employer can hire a foreign worker, they have to prove to the federal government that they are not hired, that there isn't an American who will do the job. This process consumes such huge resources that you could actually put at the border to go after coyote networks and what have you that are bringing people here illegally. You cannot solve this problem without effective legal channels, one of which would be a good guest worker program.
I want to add to that, I looked at the Bracero program for my book. And obviously, it needed reform, but they didn't need to end it. In 1964, we really didn't have a problem with illegal immigration. And if you look at the spike that I think Laura referred to, after 65, when Cesar Chavez and the unions put pressure on LBJ and the Democrats to end the Bracero program, the economic need does not go away. The demand does not go away. The labor supply in Mexico does not go away. What you see if you look at the chart is an equal spike. The same number of people come in 68 or so as were in 64, except these here in 64 were legal and circular. They would come in and work and go back to Mexico. These in 68, the same number of people, didn't leave. They hunkered down. They couldn't leave. And what you have every year is hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants coming in, sometimes 500,000, for like 30 years. So I think we've all seen these charts. We know. So just something to add on this.
As Laura adds to that, TPPF has said the acoustics are going to work a lot better. If you have a question, there's a microphone to my left. And if you would line up behind that microphone, then we can get you in order of asking the questions and everyone can hear it. We won't have to repeat it. And so we'll get you to start that way. And Laura, I'd like you to expand on that.
Well, both of them made most of the points I would have made, but I would add, particularly when you talk about the method in trying to hire a guest worker, whether you're talking about a low-skilled worker or an ag worker or even an H-1B worker, it's such an expensive process that you price out most of the small and medium-sized enterprises that wish to hire these workers. So you end up with large corporations that need to hire H-1B workers that have entire in-house immigration lawyer systems just to process through the paperwork to go about hiring these workers. And that's not workable. If you're going to have one that works, you need to have it be efficient and cheap and something that all the employers can take advantage of, not just the big ones.
We're going to go with questions at the microphone. And if you would identify yourself, state your name, if you represent a particular organization. And I know sometimes questions have to be set up a little bit in order to ask them, but get to the question, that'd be great. You start us out, sir.
I'm Norm Cooper. And first, Mr. Gonzalez, I wanted to tell you, although I'm a seventh generation Texan like you, I lived several years in Maryland. And there was a young lady, I think it was a young lady, who gave me a similar remark, that not only as Texans where they're proud of coming from, but another one said to me, you never have to ask a Texan where he's from, because he has already told you. My concern is that I don't want this nation to discriminate against people voting with their feet to come here based on race, religion, national origin, sex, all of those things. But I do want this nation to discriminate very powerfully against terrorists, criminals, drug cartellers, and I don't know how you can stop those types of people from coming across that border without having some border control. And Mr. Staple, I'm glad you brought that up when the panel finished their discussion. We have got to have border control. We have got to prohibit the danger that is facing us across those borders. We've got things going on in the Middle East now that should make us fully aware of that. We have got to control the border, and even though I think you all have very good thoughts and ideas about immigration reform, and we need to focus on those, what has got to come first is control of the border.
Well, Mike has a lot to say on this. I will just make one very quick point and make an analogy with gun control. Yes, we need to control the border, but when, just as in guns, we increase controls to such an extent that people can't get guns legally, the law-abiding citizens are the ones who will be disarmed, and the criminals are the ones who are going to have guns. If we put so many border troops without creating legal avenues for people to come here, basically the people who mean us harm, the terrorists and what have you, will always find a way to come here. The people who will not be able to enter are the law-abiding people who just want to come here to work. These two problems are tangled. You cannot solve one without solving the other.
I actually don't have much to say about that. I think that controlling the border is key. It would be a lot easier if we do have a circular guest worker program, because it dries up the rush of people coming in illegally, and then so we can control it a lot better. We do not want to militarize the border to such a degree that we change this as a society. We do need to be safe. We live in a very dangerous world, as you know, and ISIL has said they're going to bring this to us. So that is a real I don't want to minimize that fear, because it's real. But I think it would be minimized if we have, controlling the border would be easier if we have a circular guest worker program, I think we.
Well,
Yeah, no.
yeah, we understand that, but our resources are finite. There's only so much money that Congress appropriates for this every year, and so if you are spending a lot of your time running around catching someone who just wanted to go find a job and support their kids, you're not focusing the finite resources where they need to be.
And I think those are, both sides are right on this issue. And I think any model that is going to be able to be used and successfully implemented has to address the fact that our government has not secured the border, even back when the reforms were initiated, and it's led to where we are today. So any model is going to have border security components from a security aspect that gives the confidence that, fool me once, shame on you kind of deal, fool me twice, and I think there's a large segment of the population that is not willing to be fooled. Let's go to the next question here.
Thank you, Commissioner. My name is Mike McCloskey. I serve on the State Republican Executive Committee. And I've been working on, and what I think people want is, I think they want a system that's orderly. And I think everyone agrees what is now is very disorderly, and that we need to fix that. And I certainly agree with Ms. Dalmia there about the fact that it's become a black market system. And I think that's a very important point. I think we need to look at how we combine things and make it work. A good friend of mine is the Speaker of the House of the Arizona House of Representatives. And of course, they've done what some people think are forward thinking, but they didn't complete the process. There is in the United States Code, it talks about that states have the right to regulate immigration through licensing. And so the way that they regulate an E-Verify system is if you don't participate, you can lose your business license. You can't fine, you can't imprison employers for doing that. But if you do it that way, then that is legal. And it discourages the black market side. What you need to have as a component of that is also saying, and I think a way to go is some type of requisition system, just like you would hire temporary from a temp agency. I need 50 farm workers through a system that we requisition folks to come and work in the United States, and then we have an orderly system. I think the other thing that people want is whoever comes into the United States should come through legal border crossings, whatever that is. We need to not have people coming into this country any other place than through legal crossings. How do you all feel about all of that?
So what can states do? What has been the impact of Arizona? And you want to tackle those?
I completely agree with you about the orderly part. I mean, that's basically what is missing from this conversation that we are having in Washington. Let me explain to you how they do it in Australia, which is another great model for the United States. In Australia, companies are actually certified by the government to issue visas to foreign workers who they want to employ. And it is up to these companies, these employers, to actually do a background check on them and make sure that they don't have a criminal history, they don't have terrorist intention, and they don't carry deadly diseases. And the onus is put on employers that way. And that's the kind of system I would prefer. I'm a big opponent of E-Verify for the simple reason that E-Verify gives more control to the federal government and starts punishing employers for their legitimate needs. It is a system in which it doesn't just apply to foreign workers, it applies to all workers, Americans included, they too have to get a permission slip from the government. They too have to get authorization from the government in order to work somewhere. And let me point out, the error rate on E-Verify is something of the order of 6%. When you're talking of a working population of about 150 million, that works out to a lot of errors. I don't want Americans or non-Americans to be caught in the same kind of immigration labyrinth right now that foreign workers are caught in a similar employment labyrinth that an E-Verify system would create. So we need to think about other ways to make employers responsible, not E-Verify, not by punishing them in this fashion.
Tanya, the Australian model is very similar in many ways. I've been to Australia. It is also a country of immigrants that assimilates people very, very well. But Australia's an island, and it doesn't have the long border with Mexico that we have. And we're the only industrialized country that has this situation, and that is something that we need to reckon with, and that is very hard.
Look, Europe is a completely contiguous continent. A lot of European countries have exactly, a similar problem that they are getting workers from Eastern Europe, who are, which are poorer countries. And Europe has something, has European Union. They've allowed complete free mobility of workers, within their boundaries. That's the kind of system we need to kind of think about. Yeah, we are somewhat unique, but we are not that unique in facing this problem.
But I was just in the UK 2 weeks ago. They're having this same debate about Britain is not a part of Schengen. Schengen is the customs union. People can travel free. The same debates we're having here, they're having in the UK and in Europe.
Right. UK is similar to, I think, in many respects, the debate in UK is similar to ours because UK hasn't actually fully joined the European Union on this count. But the other countries like France, Germany, Scandinavian countries, actually they too are having a somewhat similar issue, but they are having it from a different presumption. They are having it from the presumption of security. We are having it from the presumption of economics. Do we want even immigrants who help us economically? I would prefer the conversation in this country to be on how should we prevent immigrants who mean us harm from coming to the country. I think that's what our focus ought to be.
Laura, did you have?
What I wanted to add really was that when you look at models from other countries like Australia, Canada, what we can learn best from them is that their models really address the labor market shortages that ours do not, because you have the businesses and the industries that are in. When you talked about the Canadian model with the provinces, they're able to look at what their labor market on their scale looks like instead of the entire country and address where those shortages are. And that's a really efficient way to deal with a guest worker program. That's something that you're not going to see here. We just have one visa system for various categories, and if you're lucky enough to win the lottery on that, great, but it doesn't mean that you're in the area that needs the visas the most.
So following the logic of expanding the permits would help secure the border, there are a lot of Americans that rightfully and justly are of the opinion that a wide open expansion of those permits in order to end the shadow economy would be a significant displacement of certain members of the American workforce. So address that in your models in that component, because that's a very real question that's circulating out.
It doesn't need to be the case. If Americans want to get these jobs, they should get them. And there's no need for the guest worker program then. The need for the guest worker program is obviated. If there's enough Americans who want to work in the ag industry or in construction at the salaries that the market bears, then there's no need for that. In my mind, it's a self-fixing problem. If no American wants to do this at a market price, and an ag company needs to survive to hire workers, then a guest worker program where they come in, do the labor, and then go back. But that would answer that question.
But in economics and supply and demand, if you have an expanded supply pool, the price goes down. So, that's just, Well,
what we know, though, we know from study after study after study is that immigrant workers are complements to native-born workers, not direct competitors. And so you find that if you bring in an immigrant worker to take a job, then a native-born worker is able to move up. They're able to use the skills that they already have that are an advantage that the foreign-born worker doesn't have, it's not a direct comparison. You're not going to, an American worker is not going to lose a job because we increase immigrant labor.
Let me just add to that. We think of the economy as a fixed pie that we have to divvy up between as X number of people. That's not how it works. Economy is always growing. That's what it means when the GDP grows. Immigrants are, the same argument that you're making against immigrants, you could also make against population growth, right? I mean, if you have a growing population which is adding 3 or 4% every year, well, we are increasing the number of people who are going to be depending on this fixed pie. But the thing is that human beings are not simply mouths that feed. They're also hands and brains that grow the economic pie. So that's what happens with immigration. You bring these people in, not only do they earn their own keep, but they generate a surplus, a wealth surplus that the whole economy and the whole country benefits from. That's how this country has become wealthy.
And to your point about population growth, we've been able to accommodate and have enough jobs more or less for everyone since our founding, and we've grown substantially. It's not a one-for-one. You're not swapping in one worker and removing another. You're growing the pie. You're creating more jobs, more businesses, more opportunities.
We're ignoring the elephant in the room here. We have a system of government benefits. For example, the disability program. If you and I apply for disability, even in, like right now, one of us will get it. It's 50% chance of getting it. So, this is what somebody sitting at home and getting by and being happy with getting by, living on disabilities, is not. That's what we're talking about. If we're really serious about this, we need to tackle this whole system in which people would actually have to take these jobs. Americans would have to take these jobs. Then you know what? We don't need to have so many guest workers.
It eliminates the labor shortage.
Yeah, it eliminates the labor shortage. But if somebody can sit at home on the couch and watch Oprah, why is he going to go and work and do backbreaking labor? Sorry, $10 an hour is $15 an hour. It's not competitive.
That's where we wanted you to go with that. I mean, it's a culture of dependency
Sorry, I had to say the elephant is there. Let's not ignore it.
That's exactly right. I think people understand that, and that system has to end. Right here, sir.
Yes, I'd like to ask the panel. The current conservative position on immigration appears to be first secure the border, then we'll talk comprehensive immigration reform. And based on what all three panelists have said today, though, doesn't that have it backwards? I mean, isn't it really, don't we first need to legally greatly increase the levels and quotas of immigration? And at that point, then, once we have a pathway for people to come into this country legally, only then can we have a secure border. I mean, there is some history. I think Mr. Gonzalez mentioned it in the 50s and 60s. When the program ended, the number of border apprehensions went down by 95% after the actual, it was actually in the 1950s when the actual limits and quotas on immigration were increased. So, I mean, I guess what I'm wondering is, isn't the current conservative position somewhat backwards?
Well, I think you're asking two questions. You're asking a policy question and you're asking a political question. And so the answers are different. And I will say that I don't think that you're entirely right or entirely wrong, because immigration is a big subject. It covers a lot of areas. And so when you talk about comprehensive immigration reform, whether it's going to be one bill or several piecemeal bills like the House was talking about doing, you can't do each piece in isolation. You have to understand what the ramifications of each piece are going to be on other pieces. And so it's a little bit chicken and egg for me. I don't think that you can just focus on securing the border and then worry about the legal immigration system, but you can't also ignore the border while reforming the legal immigration system.
I just have a one-word answer for you. Yes, we do have it backwards.
All right.
Dave Heckert. You know, if only banks would give out all the money to the robbers, then people wouldn't stop robbing the banks. You do have it backwards. You have have the premises backwards. Until you secure the border, and yes, militarize it, because it is a national security issue, we are never going to get a hold of the problem of $2 billion a month getting sent back to Mexico that doesn't go through our tax system, doesn't go through our infrastructure improvement. Why you seem to have the notion that because people have a bad situation in their country, they have a right to come into mine illegally, I don't know where you got it, but it is wrong. The second thing is that once the border is secure, that will cut off the flow of illegal immigrants. And these people that are coming over, there's only a small portion of them, comparatively, that are coming over to work. They're not massively coming over. They're coming over for the magnet systems, as was pointed out. All the welfare systems, the disabilities, everything that they can get a loophole on. So you really need to reconsider the way you're thinking of this, because we are facing an invasion day by day that's eroding our security, eroding our health. I mean, would you allow people that just showed up at the doorstep into your house without checking them out? What if one of them had a disease that gave it to your children? These are real issues. It's not about them. It's about the government enforcing the laws and upholding their end of the compact that they have with the citizens, not the people coming from outside.
Mr. Hackert, I don't disagree with what you said about the need to, every sovereign country needs to have a border and have a secure border. That is one of the key aspects of sovereignty, and I agree with you on that. I'll take issue with one thing you said, that they're attracted by a welfare system. I think people, the immigrants that I've talked to, actually do have in fact, if you look at the stats, they have a strong work ethic. I think once here, it is eroded by a system that pushes, I mean, the food stamp, the FDA aggressively markets itself on Spanish language radio and says it's no longer just our system is no longer a system where it's a safety net that catches people who need help and help them get by. It is, if you can get this, if you qualify and you don't get it, you're a fool. So even people who are making do, people who are making ends meet, the marketing of food stamps says to them on the radio, look, if you qualify, you're a fool if you don't get it. By the way, they do the same thing in Appalachia. There's a program called, Ending Mountain Pride. So our government is eroding our population. So I think that people, a lot of the immigrants that I do see, they do come in and try to work hard. So that's the only thing I take issue with.
Well,
but on securing the border, it is one of the key aspects of sovereignty.
We're not going to have a debate as much as
Uh,
I'd like to.
No, but I
I'm
mean,
missing out on debate.
No, but if you want to say something,
But-
I'd like to hear what you bring.
Just real quickly, if you can, because I know she has, and I know Sheriff Lauterbach's here, representing Texas Sheriff Association.
Can I just say one quick thing to this? I agree with you, a sovereign country has the right to control its borders. It can sovereignly decide whether it wants to control those borders in order to allow orderly immigration flows or become a fortress. America has the choice of becoming like North Korea, where nobody goes and nobody enters, but it's all completion. Or it can be live up to its.
If you disagree, everybody respects that, but let's give our speakers.
Or it can live up to its own history of being the land of immigrants and allow an orderly flow of immigrants based on the needs of the employers and the Americans who want to employ them.
I understand that. However, they're trying to keep people in North Korea. I don't see a lot of Americans rushing to try to get into North Korea.
If you are afraid of big government, look, big government is a very, very blunt tool. You give it the authority to seal the border, and it can use that same authority to also keep its citizens in. That's historically how big government works.
Okay. Laura, did you have one more before we?
No.
Okay. All right. Let's try to get another question or two in, and I want to get representing Sheriff Association. Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Greg Bloom. My question has to do with the difference of the 1729 situation, or even the 1829 or 1949 situation. When they came over, like all of those during those predecessors, and probably most up until recently, immigrants coming in, they realized they had a level that they had to achieve. They came because of our values. They came not to transgress those values, but to adopt those values and gain for their own family the same thing. So if we take that benchmark and say, when an immigrant comes in, here's what it cost the rest of the Americans who are already there, versus now when they come in. And I realize, I was in the construction industry, and those who came from Hispanic cultures worked their tails off. I mean, they worked very, very hard, so it's not a work ethic issue. It is, but now there's a for those of us here, people are getting incredible amounts of money that we're paying for. When somebody walks in and they have access to that, whether they should or not, it's still happening at a high level. I think that's much of the ground. So one is, what's the difference of what it cost back then versus now? The second is, what's to keep us buying the property or taking property owners along the border and just doing our own fence? I mean, the federal government sits, week by week. It used to be year by year. Week by week, they set standards for new levels of incompetency that are unimaginable. Yet we continue to go forward. There's not one facet of life that we would do business with anybody who fell to that low of a level. Yet we continue to do that. We wait on them to solve their own problem. They can't do it. So that's the two questions: the history to now, and how we make those kind of changes in the state.
First point, that was exactly the whole subject of my talk. I mean, I completely agree. That was the whole subject of my conversation. I agree with you 100% on your first point.
But how do we quantify that? I mean, so that's the core difference. The value is the difference, but people should be upset that somebody is coming in, and all of a sudden it opens up all of our pockets and responsibility to take care of them. It's a different mindset. So the value.
We need to get the government out of apportioning participation in society. Sorry, go ahead.
Let me say a couple of things to that. First of all, immigrants have changed less and Americans have changed more. Americans are far more dependent on the welfare state than actually immigrants are. If you look at the employment rate of immigrant men, Hispanic men in this country, it's 90%. They don't come here for welfare. They really come here to earn a living. In fact, legally, after the 1996 immigration reform, most form of welfare is off limits to immigrants. So if you look at study after study, not only immigrant welfare consumption rate, even especially illegal immigrants, their welfare consumption rates are far, far, far lower than the native population. That's point number one. Point number two, all the immigrants come over here in their peak working years. Economic immigrants come here in their peak working years, when the investment in building their capabilities has been made by other countries. So they come over here as fully contributing members of the economy, and they contribute far more to the economy than they draw back from it. I mean, that's why immigrants, if you look at any side, even George Borjas, who is a Harvard economist who's not actually a big fan of immigration, even he concedes immigration, by and large, improves the GDP of the United States by a factor of, 0.5 or something. Laura might know.
Laura, let's have your comments, and then we'll get Sheriff in here, and we'll go from there.
Well, I was just going to add, particularly when you look at legal immigrants, and if you look at undocumented immigrants who are working on the books, there are taxes that are paid out of that. And so because for the first 5 years of being a legal permanent resident, having a green card, you're not entitled to the vast majority of benefits here. You are paying purely into the system and not taking anything out of it. So we get a definite benefit from their tax dollars and their work.
Okay, thank you. Sheriff Automatic.
Thank you, and thank the public policy for holding this venue. I come to you today with just a short message from the Sheriff's Association of Texas. And let me first say that no sheriff is anti-immigrant, but we are all very anti-criminality. And what's happening on our border is the criminal element is unchecked. And a underutilized resource in this state is your Texas Sheriff for local control. So I would ask that each of you take a look at a solution, possibly from the sheriff's standpoint, that local control may be able to do a lot of things to help as far as a state solution on this problem. We stand ready as Texas sheriffs to help secure the border any way we can. And if we were to get some federal policies such as the 287G re-implemented, which give Texas law enforcement ability to enforce immigration law, then that would be a significant improvement for our position here in the state of Texas. So, again, just a short message, but you may look closely at an underutilized resource here in Texas. That's your Texas Sheriff. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff. We appreciate that. We certainly appreciate that perspective of some tangible things that can be advocated for at the federal level to empower our sheriffs and those that are newly elected in each of our counties to protect our citizenry. Any 30-second speed round comments as we close here?
No? I think we covered it. Yeah.
Let's give a round of applause to our panelists here today. To our colleagues, Peter Robbins and Michael Wallace. We appreciate your work. We appreciate you being with us today. Obviously, there's a great deal of passion surrounding this issue. It is a complex one, but only through forums like this and through exercising these back and forth ideas will we come to a solution. One closing comment and housekeeping for you. This September the 25th and 26th, Texas Public Policy Foundation, along with the Heritage Foundation, will be hosting an energy summit totally devoted to national and international policy. That's going to be held in Houston, first of its kind in Texas, so log in to crossroads-summit.com. And if you don't remember that, go to Texas Public Policy Foundation website and you can find out about the energy policy. Thank you all for being here today.